Let's go ahead and start our conversation. I want to welcome all of our attendees and our panelists and everyone who has done the work in order to make all of this happen. I want to welcome everyone today for joining us and spending your time and your lunch with us in order to learn more about an important topic. Welcome to Understanding Burma, Current Events and Global and Local Community Response. I want to welcome the attendees on behalf of Colorado Refugee Connect. So if you're not familiar with this organization, Colorado Refugee Connect is a collaborative initiative designed to further integrate across your state. And there are three strategies, which are learn, engage, and celebrate. Today, we hope that you can learn more about what's happening in Burma, engage in the ways that our panelists suggest that you can, and ultimately celebrate the beauty of this country and its people as we debunk myths and learn what matters most to our panelists and to their communities. We'll also share more about how you can stay connected to Colorado Refugee Connect at the end of the program. As most of us know, Burma is in incredible turmoil right now. Burma hosts some of the most isolated and vulnerable populations in the world. In fact, in 2011, Burma began the process of political, social, and economic reform. This led to more freedoms for civilians and increased foreign investment. But despite these gains, Burma has struggled to recover from Cyclone Koman, a devastating storm that displaced over 1.7 million people in 2015. There was also an acute overthrow of Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League of Democratic Government on February 1st. So today, let's explore a bit about Burma's history, including the genocide of the Rohingya and the marginalization of other ethnic minorities. You may not know this, but Colorado is actually home to more than 5,000 individuals from Burma, Rohingya, Karen, Karenni, Chin, Mon, Kachin, Shan, and other ethnic minorities. Understanding what has happened and what is happening right now are crucially and critically important for speaking out and demanding change to support our Burmese neighbors and their families and communities in ways that they want to be supported. So today is an opportunity for all of us, not just to listen, but to learn, with the idea that building our understanding will support you to be an advocate as well as an ally alongside Burmese ethnic minorities to help build a stable, safe, and democratic Burma for all. So just a couple of housekeeping rules before we get started today. We ask that our attendees, because I know you'll have a lot of questions for our phenomenal panelists that we have, if you can hold those questions till the 30 minutes remaining of our program. And we will have an opportunity to hear from the panelists directly in order to answer your questions. So I would like at this time to introduce you to our fantastic and incredible panelists of speakers. Our first panelist is Elvina Tu. She's a first-generation Karen refugee from Thailand who settled in the United States in 2008. She's a Denver Public Schools Asian Education Advisory Council member and serves DPS students as an instructional coach and an ELA interventionist. She holds a master's educational leadership with principal licensure. Our second panelist is Ken McLean. He's an associate professor of international development and social change at Clark University. He has carried out research on Burma for nearly 3 decades. His latest book, entitled Crimes in Archival Form, Human Rights, Fact Production, and Myanmar. Our third panelist is Myra Degapa, is also the Refugee Congress delegate for Virginia. She's a Karen human rights activist, director of the US Campaign for Burma, and a founder of the Karen American Organization, otherwise known as KAO. She works to empower grassroots activists in the Burmese diaspora across the United States to rally for human rights. And finally, our last panelist is Nisa Kauramadad, is a Rohingya refugee who lived in Malaysia before resettling here in 2015. She became a US citizen in 2020, having never held citizenship in any country before. She studies English at IRC NOCO, which is Northern Colorado, and hopes to take her children to Burma so they can hug their grandmother for the very first time. I love that. So now we'd like to introduce our panelists. If you can go ahead and come on screen. And in order to provide some context and background about what's going on before we take a deeper dive into the issues and questions, Professor Ken McLean has graciously provided us with a presentation followed by Myra, who will also be taking a deeper dive into the historical, to provide us with some historical context and why this issue is so important to discuss today. So with that said, Ken, go right ahead and share all of your knowledge with us, and we are ready for you whenever you're ready.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction, both to me and my other panelists, and I'm very grateful for everyone here who made this event possible. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share a little bit about what I know to help contextualize what is happening now. And in my view, one of the central things in order to do that is to pay a little attention to the past. And there are multiple pasts in Burma because there are multiple groups with their own histories that intersect at some moments and not at others. And that complexity, while it can sometimes feel overwhelming, is often lost in the mainstream reporting on what is happening in the country in general, and certainly since the coup earlier this year. And I have this little opening slide as sort of a reminder that while the international media has historically focused on Aung San Suu Kyi and the democratic movements in urban areas, there are many, many groups in the periphery, the so-called ethnic minorities, that have often supported or also supported democratic movements, but are written out or overlooked in these histories. And one of the things I'm hoping we can do today is to give you a clearer sense about how non-majority populations understand what is happening. And with that in mind, I'm going to speak briefly on the past. So to do so, first I want to situate you in space, for those of you not familiar where Burma is. It's bordered by Thailand and Laos to the east, China to the northeast, and India to the west, with a little bit on Bangladesh, which I'll come back to. And the reason why I started with this map is it is incorrect. It is an imaginary that we often take for granted and think about it uncritically. And here's what I mean by that. If you go back to the mid-19th century, there was no such thing as Burma, at least as what we think about it today. There were a wide range of different kinds of polities reflecting the different cultures, economies, and resource uses of different populations that we now call ethnic groups. They waxed and they waned, and they had relationships throughout the region. So although there was a kingdom in what is now central Burma, in the area around Mandalay and Ava, these boundaries we see and take for granted did not exist. And in fact, they were, as my heading says, a product of colonial state formation. There were 3 wars waged by the British and fought by Indian troops beginning in 1824 and ending in 1885. And over those decades, the British slowly annexed these areas, which now form the territorial boundaries of the country we call Burma. And just to highlight some of these complexities, Burma was not its own colony per se. It was actually administered from India for many, many decades until approximately 1938. So it was an add-on to the Indian Empire. The other key point here that's relevant for our discussion today is the well-known British policy of divide and rule. Now, broadly speaking, ethnic Bama are located historically in this central region that I'm circling. And in that area, they were subject to direct rule by the British. The periphery of the country makes an upside down U, like a horseshoe, is where the non-majority ethnic populations historically resided. Now, again, these maps can be misleading because there are people scattered all over the country. The Karen, we have some Karen here we'll speak today, which are heavily represented in this area, also populate the Irrawaddy Delta and other regions. But the basic point here is the framing of the conflicts tends to be between the ethnic majority Bama and the military or the armed forces known as the Tatmadaw against ethnic minority groups around the fringes of the country. And that is because the Tatmadaw, the armed forces, has been waging a war of settler colonialism, where they've tried to extend military power, economic activities, and cultural assimilation into these peripheral areas as part of an effort of state consolidation. That the state, as we think of it, never controlled these areas around the periphery. They were inhabited and self-governed by many, many different ethnic groups, allegedly a total of 135, although that figure is controversial. But the point I'm trying to make here is the coup and the conflict over democracy has a very long history as a result of the British policies of divide and rule. And here I broke down 3 key debates that have animated the conflicts since the country received its independence from Britain in 1948. And the first is this question of a centralized state versus a federal structure. The armed forces has advocated for a strong centralized state, if not under direct military rule, which was the case for many decades, under civilian rule that the military had veto power over. And in effect, it's always wanted to dominate the political, economic, and cultural systems of the country. Not surprisingly, the other ethnic groups have desired their own forms of governance, their own cultural and religious practices, and so on. And as a result, they want a federal structure where there is coordination across the country and a sense of national unity, but are allowed to live their lives in a way they see fit. Now, this debate is complicated by a second debate, and that as a result of British policies, European ideas of race have heavily shaped how different groups, different populations in Burma think of themselves and think of others. And what is necessary, in my view, to move past these struggles, armed and political, that have racked the country since 1948, is to recognize that identities are not fixed. They're social constructions, they're relational, and that being Burmese does not mean you have to be effectively Burman, the ethnic majority. And that links to the third debate I'm going to touch very briefly on. In recent years, extremist forms of Buddhist nationalism have grown in Burma, and it's connected to a long-running campaign by the military to eradicate ethnic difference by pushing Burman language, Burman religious practices, Buddhism in particular, and Burman education as a way of undermining the identity of the different ethnic groups and forcing them to assimilate. Again, not surprisingly, representatives of many of these groups have resisted this, both armed and otherwise, and maintain their right to have a degree of self-determination. Now, the reality is by framing these in binary terms, it comes across as a sharp distinction. In my view, it's much more of a continuum where you find people's views in different places depending on the topic, which both makes it possible to envision different futures for the people of Burma, but also more complicated because it's not a simple either or. And the last point I want to make before turning the microphone, as it were, over to my colleagues is this question of victimhood. Different ethnic groups have suffered very similar forms of state-sponsored violence since the late 1940s. Those can be grouped under the headings of crimes against humanity and war crimes, things like using food as a weapon of war, widespread sexual assault against ethnic women, massive use of forced labor, landmines against civilians, forced displacement, and the list sadly goes on. But not everyone's suffering counts in the eyes of many people. And here I need to mention briefly the plight of the Rohingya. It's a complicated history, and I'm happy to answer questions later if people wish to know more. But basically, there have been campaigns of forced displacement, efforts of ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya, a largely Sunni Muslim group that has resided in this part of Western Burma for centuries, but is not allowed to have citizenship because people who wish to exclude them from the national body view them as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. That is the main narrative, but again, it's more complicated. The point here is the events of 2016, 2017, and 2018, in which nearly 750,000 people fled into Bangladesh in order to save their lives, was not the first time, was not the second time, nor was it the third time this happened. These campaigns date back to 1978. Unfortunately, they've received very little attention until the most recent round. And here you can see in this slide, red dots indicating where Rohingya villages have been partially or totally burnt to the ground. And as of the 2017 date, it was nearly 600 of them. More have been destroyed since then. But again, that is a broader conversation I'll return to. The last point here, the reason why I included competitive victimhoods. The divide and rule strategies of the British have been very effective as wielded by the different military governments over the last 7 decades. And what it has created through the racialization of identity, this very fixed idea about my people suffering. And it's undermined or limited the ability of many groups to see how their suffering is related to the suffering of other groups. And that is one of the reasons why the different ethnic, political, and military groups have always struggled to cooperate with one another to achieve their political goals. And this often breaks down into, as you see in the United States and other places, different groups saying, but I have suffered more, and therefore I need more assistance. And again, I'll come down to this, back to this later during the Q&A session if people are resistant. But the people who have arguably suffered the most, the Rohingya, are often entirely excluded because of the surprising popularity, broadly speaking, of the violence used to evict them from the country. And this is a fundamental issue that we all need to consider. If you support human rights through democratic change in Burma, in my view, that means extending human rights to everyone. And that includes the Rohingya, which is something the majority of the population has arguably been resistant to doing. And if we're to have peace and security in that country, this is an issue that will need to be addressed moving forward. So I'll stop here to leave plenty of time for my colleagues. I'm going to stop my share. And I believe, Myra, you're next.
Yes, Myra will be our next presenter to provide some additional context and historical overview on what has happened and what is currently happening. Thank you, Myra.
One moment, I thought I have my PowerPoint open. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, is the PowerPoint on?
Yes.
I can't really tell the
Yes.
difference at my end.
You're good.
Well, thank you so much to all the organizers for making this event happen. It is very important time that we talk about Burma, among many other issues across the world. And of course, thank you to all the participants that coming on today. I'm hoping that the information I will be sharing will be something that for good enough for you to learn and maybe take it forward. And if you can do that, I'll greatly appreciate that. Oh, okay. Sorry. How do I get to the second page?
There should be an arrow. You can just push your right arrow button to the right.
Just come out, sorry. Okay, so picking up from what Ken was talking to us about earlier. So the situation in the country in terms of ethnic armed conflict, human rights abuses, mass atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity has been going on for decades, depending on which ethnic group you're talking to. For instance, if you talk to the Korean ethnic group where I come from, we would tell you at least 70 years and over. And so coming to last November, when we had our election here, Burma also had the election. And to their best ability, the Election Commission, the NLD, the National League for Democracy, they trying to do their best in order to, of course, but they're trying to win the seat so that they can continue on with the work for the next year, right? But when they overwhelmingly won the election again, then the military junta came in and saying, well, this is not free and fair. There are a lot of lies, fraud and all this stuff. So that is why they finally come into place and taking over the power by force overnight. And of course, the people on the ground very bravely coming out and defend the rights, their own rights, in order to be able to have the people that they are voting for to be in power to run the country and to making sure that people are helped. So since then, the Burmese military also staging the coup on the 1st of February and took over the country. And from then, they're using different kinds of weapons and ammunitions, and even using drones in order to surveillance the leader of the protesters as well as the protesters. So basically, we ended up with having civil war in the urban area. This is not, right now what I'm talking about is the urban area, not even going into the ethnic minority areas yet. So to date, we have about 860 killed by the military junta, which are the illegal government or a group. And out of the 860, 73 were children as young as 5. And we also have 5,965 who were arrested for no reason, but just to stand up for their own rights and for others. And sadly, out of the almost 6,000 people who were arrested and detained, 31 of them given death sentence, and some of them, they're very young, teenagers. So it tells us that the Burmese military is really trying to take over the country by force. And I don't really see any point at this time that they will be willing to follow what the people are asking for and what the people are wanting to have for to live a life as the people of Burma. And now I wanted to take you all to the ethnic minorities area. Here I use the term minority in a sense that they are the lesser number of people, but it doesn't mean that we are inferior to the ruling junta as the majority. No, we are the lesser number, the smaller groups, and therefore we call it the minority in that sense. So the civil war has been going on for decades, but here we're talking about from the 1st of February until now, 1st of February 2021 until now, where you see fighting goes on in pretty much every state across the country. 64 airstrikes in the past couple months, and on the ground armed clashes for 660. And we have at least 200,000 people internally displaced. And the actual number could be more than 200,000. So human rights violation is happening at every corner of the country. I feel as though we are going back to where we were back in the mid 80s, 90s, where the Burmese military junta used human as human shield, and then rape as weapon of war in order to demoralize and to dehumanize the ethnic armed groups, and to also put fears into the population so that we don't have the gut to get up, fight against, and stand up for our rights. But one thing I wanted to ensure is that we will not be bogged down by the military's aggression. Otherwise, as you see, the people on the ground are fighting, whether inside the country, in the urban area, as well as in the ethnic minorities area. So the picture you see here is just a mark shift left over after the brutality, the burning, the bombing of the military by the military. Just to give you a little gist, so the left top corner is the Catholic Church was bombed by the military airstrikes, and yeah, it was totally destroyed, completely destroyed. It was a beautiful church. And then at the bottom is the high school in Karen State, also was destroyed. Considering how many years for the Karen population, the Karen education department to be able to put their funds together to build up this education center for the Karen youth in the country. And here they just come in a minute, just bomb it and destroy everything. This is a way of Burmanization as well, in order to demoralize and destroy the community so that we don't know anything, we don't have anything left, even including our own books and language so that we can go back and learn. But that is not going to happen. We will fight. And the right-hand side, those are the IDPs, the internally displaced people whose villages were bombed by the Burmese junta's airstrikes and trying to flee for life. So they're here, literally the top picture, they are on the Selwyn River to cross over to Thai side in order to seek refuge for a certain short amount of time. But then once they got to the Thai side, the Thai military literally lining up their barbed wires and not letting them getting up to the ground where they can safely stay for a few days. And of course, the bottom, that reminds me so much of my own life when I was an internally displaced person. This is how we live in the caves, in jungles. But the difference from when my time and the difference with the people, for the people right now, is that during my time, we were able to hide and we were not that worried so much about being found by the Burmese military. If we were able to find a proper and safe and remote spot, secure spot. But the people right now, they couldn't find anything like we used to find because the Burmese military used the drones in order to surveillance what's around the village and where people can hide. So their situation right now is a lot worse than when I was an internally displaced person back in the 80s and 90s. So here is just to give you the gist of what we've been doing. What pressure and what the American government is doing is that so they are putting on sanctions in order to stop the Burmese military junta from committing human rights abuses and mass atrocities and killing its own people by sanctioning the top generals and also their big companies, their oil companies, shortly Meg and Mel, and then and also sanctioning the pearl, timber, gemstone companies that link to the junta and their cronies. And also right now we're still trying to get another big oil company, which is we call it the petroleum industry, and we haven't gotten it yet. The reason why we're trying to get all these big companies to be unsanctioned is that these are where the big chunk of money came into the military's pocket, and none of this go to the civilians. Probably a small amount of money go to the troops. Even that, the leftover is bigger than what you can think of. That is why they're able to buy the warplane, the warships, and everything that they don't really need. But then the people over there is starving and fleeing for lives. So at the Hill, we also have several different resolutions that are put out and also passed. But at the same time, we're still working on a bill, which we hope it'll come through sometime this month, hopefully. If that is the case, then we're going to have some pressure that will stop the military one way or the other, even if not to the full extent, but to a certain level that we can maybe slow down some level of abuses. So let's see. Last but not the least, I wanted to leave you all with this big page that I don't want to bore you, is that please continue talking to your senators and your representatives. You are the voices of the people of Burma. You are the voices of the IDPs and the refugees and the CDM protesters, and you can help us make a difference. So as we are calling for the sanction on Myanmar oil and gas enterprises, which is also short-term and MOG, yeah, that is something that we have to educate our government officials to understand, that these are the companies that give the military so much money that they ended up killing people for free. And also, we certainly did need the cross-border assistance badly. The US has been supporting the cross-border assistance for years, for a couple of decades already, and they are still doing it. And I'm really grateful for that. And I also wanted to urge all of us to remind them that the help, the cross-border is still needed, especially at this point of time. And also, our government official need to recognize the work of the civil society organizations, the community-based organizations. They're the one who does the groundwork and dealing with the impacted community. But then the fund goes to the Burmese government. And then when they have to send MOU, half of the money is already gone. So if our government can work with the civil society organizations, community-based organization for funding the refugees and IDPs, that'll be great. And we also need to ask our government to pressure the Burmese military junta to allow humanitarian access. Right now, we do have some resources, but we cannot get to those who needed support. And that is very painful when people are starving and we have resources. And of course, we need to inform our government officials to pressure the Burmese military to stop going out and killing its own people. We are not their enemy, but they are making us to be their enemy, and then they just come and find us and shoot us and kill us. So that is something that our government needs to understand, that the people of Burma are not the enemies of the military junta. And of course, the release of the political prisoners, especially, and also including the ones who were recently arrested, and the MPs, those who have to run the country, they need to be able to get out so that they can run the country. Otherwise, the military will run the country and a lot more people will die before we know. So I'll stop here and I'll be around for answering any kinds of questions you may have. So I'll stop sharing here, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Myra, and I want to thank Ken for his presentation as well. It gave us such a better understanding and an overview, a bird's eye view that Ken had presented, and we certainly appreciate Myra's on-the-ground images and her policy ask of how we can be more helpful and better allies to the crisis that's going on right now in Burma. And with that, if I can bring all of our panelists onto the screen right now, we'll begin our Q&A. But because we have so many different topics to cover for our remaining time, as well as the Q&A afterwards, we ask that you keep your responses to 3 minutes or less for the questions that we ask, only because we want to know so much about everything that you want to share. And so with that, this question is for Ken. Can you explain the relationship between Burma and Myanmar, and why is it important to distinguish?
Great question, and it's a controversial one. The country, or the name Burma, comes from a British mispronunciation of Bama. And so there is this irony that Burma itself is a colonial name. Nonetheless, it was one adopted and used after independence, and it remained the official name until the military took over. And in the 1980s, I believe, the military government began renaming many regions, cities, and so on around the country to make them more Burman or Myanmar. And so many people object to the renaming of the country and other places as a form of cultural assimilation, and one that was done by fiat. That is, the people were not consulted, and there was no vote, if you will, on whether we should change the name of the country or not. Now, to further complicate things, that some countries, the US is an example, continues to use the name Burma. But at this point, most foreign countries use Myanmar. In the country, you hear both. Sometimes it's a generational thing. They simply grew up using Burma and they use it because that's what they know. Other people use Myanmar because they're younger. Sometimes their choice depends on their politics. So there's no easy answer to that, in my view, although some people have very strong opinions that it should never be used. Myanmar should not be used. And I understand and respect that. You'll hear me use both. That's all I'll say at the moment, but a great question.
Thank you so much, Ken. As a Vietnamese refugee, I understand the importance of names and the detriments of assimilation. So thank you for that explanation for those of us who aren't familiar with the context of that. With that, I want to move to a little more about the military coup back in February of this year. Myra, can you speak on that as far as who led the coup and what are some of the early implications that happened?
So the guy, we call him Senior General Miale, of course. He's the one who led the coup, and he's the one who is the richest in the country, stealing all the money from the people from every part of the country, whether from oil and gas or from all kinds of natural resources from every state. And so he doesn't want to negotiate with anybody in terms of bringing about the change to the country, but instead just to enrich himself, and also worrying that he might lose his business and his millions and all those stuff. And so it was pretty intense at the very beginning, where you see life were lost on daily basis. But having said that, would you think now, because of the brutality that they shoot people, and the people don't have any arm to protect themselves? And would they be scared? No, the people are so courageous. They came out. And the very positive implication that I've seen is that now people coming in across the country from different corners of the ethnic states rise up together, protesting together. Some of them, they put their life in the line, almost pretty much like those inside the country. And some of them, they were protected by the ethnic armed groups so that they don't get harmed by the Burmese troops. And so these are like the positive implication that I wanted to bring to our audience. But of course, there's a lot of lives, a loss of lives, a lot of abuses. Like earlier, there was a picture where you saw at the top, that's where the military took away the dead body so that they can make money out of it to say it very easily. Because what they were trying to do is that if the family want the body back, they have to pay money. Or some of the family members, the dead body came back with no organs inside their body, all this stuff. So yes, it is very brutal.
Thank you, Myra. I certainly appreciate your perspectives and to provide us with greater insight into what happened this year, you know, something more recent. Thank you for that. I want to shift gears a little bit now and explore a little bit about lived experiences, because I know it's so important to hear from actual voices that have been impacted, as opposed to learning about it third hand, right? Or through a third party. There's nothing more genuine and more effective than hearing from those who have lived through this experience. So Elvina, this question is directed for you. What have these conflicts across Burma meant for you as an individual and for your family? And if you could please share a little bit more about your own experience, however you're comfortable with sharing.
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. So the conflict in Burma re-traumatized me, you know, brings back many fears and worries, because I personally lived through that experience firsthand back in 1997 when I had to flee due to military taking over. And every time I think about my people in Burma, my heart hurts, you know, and every time I look at news, and the PTSD from my childhood just rushes back, and I'm having a really hard time sometimes, because, you know, as a teacher, I love children, and just thinking about many children in Myanmar are literally like currently experiencing what I experienced when I was a child. Like Mara mentioned it earlier, that back in our time, they don't have high technology to monitor us. You know, nowadays they have all those advanced technology, right? It's make it even more difficult for our people who's currently experiencing the coup right now. So hiding in the hole, it just brought back so many memories, thinking about, you know, just having to dodge the bullets, the airstrikes, and have literally no food, and hiding in the jungle just to stay alive. And, you know, just to start, and then the pain and the suffering will follow. If you're lucky, you'll make it out alive, but the trauma will never leave you. The trauma will never leave them. And then we'll just carry the emotional scars with, you know, us for a long time, if it's not for the rest of our life. And no child should experience that. You know, as a teacher, just thinking back, it's really it hurts me. So I wonder how I can help and what can be done to find a resolution so that this history doesn't repeat over and over again. That's where I'm at right now.
Thank you so much, Elvina, for sharing your thoughts. And I'm so glad you're in a position where you can help through your own lived experiences through the next generation to help them navigate through some of the difficulties as well. Thank you for that. And just like Ken had mentioned in his presentation, you know, whose suffering matters, which communities matter, and why do they matter? Why is one community more important than the other? So thank you for sharing. Nisa, this question is for you. How is the situation with your family in Burma right now?
Yeah, my family is, they just live it for difficult. They cannot go outside. So, and when you study, the military take away the Aung San Suu Kyi. So before 1 day, all people protest, too many people die, too many people shooting, and there were women, they rape, so women, they killing children. So by the way, and the April or May, our Rohingya people for special month. So we cannot go outside for prayer. We cannot go for celebrate with other people, and we cannot hug each other. So they just say after 6 o'clock evening, you cannot go outside. So if you go outside, they arrest. So they arrest for women. If women, they rape. So a lot of people die. So I just worry about my family. And then now the school are open. So now children are school for register. But at school, all school have military. But some parents are they scary about their children, so they no register. But some parents are scary about military, so they register for children. So how to explain? My history is like talking about Alivina and Marie, like talking same. So
Nisa, thank you so much for sharing that to provide us some insight back in your homeland and how your family is still impacted to this day and living under constant fear. We appreciate you sharing that with us.
thank you.
This question is for Myra. Before you fled Burma, what did it mean for you to identify as Burmese, and what does it mean for you today?
Before I left Burma, I'd say the word Karen would always come first. And there were times when I'd be like, no, don't call me Burmese. I'm not a Burmese, I'm Karen. And that is something that I've been very much proud of, to be a Karen. I mean, what else that I could be more proud of to be who I am. But since I started leaving the refugee camp, started getting to the NGO world, coming to the US, start working in the advocacy world, then I have to learn to take it in, because I am somebody from Burma, right? And I have to be willing to be called a Burmese when needed, right? But every time when I've been called Burmese, I always sort of like will bring it back to, yes, Burmese, but ethnic Karen, because I want people to know that Burma is not just for Burman, but Burma is for everybody. And I wanted to know that people know that Karen are also one of the ethnic minorities in the country, and we've been there ever since. And therefore, people need to know where I'm from.
Thank you, Myra.
One way or the other, I'm still trying to get used to when I get called Burmese. A lot of times I have to be like, oh, think twice. Yes, I am a Burmese. Okay.
It sounds like an evolving process. You know,
Yeah.
As things progress and things change, your identity and how you view yourself shifts as well. Thank you. Elvina, how about you? Before you fled Burma, what did it mean to you to be Burmese, and what does it mean for you today?
So I was actually never like identify as Burmese, because I was actually born and raised in the border, and I'm actually not Burmese, not Thai. I'm like in the middle refugee camp. So just like Myra said, we're like, since we're born, we know that we're Korean, and since my people, Korean people, we have a KNU, which is Korean National Union, that's resisting the forced assimilation. Therefore, we are kind of like in the middle, and we're So I'm always say I'm Korean, I'm stateless, therefore I'm identified as refugees with no homeland. And when people ask me where I'm from, it's a very complicated story. And I just have a really hard time. I always ask them, do you have like 5 minutes to explain where I'm from and who I am? If you don't have time and you're like, okay, if you're from Burma, then you're Burmese. I'm like, no, I'm actually born in refugee. So I'm actually a refugee. I'm stateless. I'm not Burmese. I mean, there's Korean people from Burma and Korean people from Thailand, and they're called like Thai Korean or Burmese. However, I'm like, I'm nobody. Nobody even know I exist because I lived in a refugee camp. You know, I have no homeland, stateless. So when people ask me where I'm from, like I'm from Thailand refugee camp. And do you have 5 minutes? I'll tell you all about my history. If not, then I'm Korean. And just like Mara said, I don't know how to even answer that question. If anybody called me Burmese, I mean, I can speak Burmese, but I can speak Thai a little bit, but I'm Korean and I'm a displaced person.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elvina. You know, much of my experience in advocating for refugees and immigrants, everyone knows, at least in my world, who a refugee is, who an immigrant is, but people don't know stateless people or people, asylum seekers or temporary protected status folks. So thank you so much for sharing that. I want to shift a little bit to citizenship, because I know that our friend Nisa had recently gained citizenship, and because of the non-recognition of Rohingya as Burmese, you've never held citizenship in any country, and you recently became a US citizen. Can you tell us more about that, Nisa?
Yeah, my country, we cannot get a citizen. They no give because and the Burmese people and Rohingya people are different. So they say they just give for Burmese people. So our Rohingya people for they don't give a citizen because they asking about like I don't know how to question. So where are you from? You are Rohingya is where I come from. So the question, so we don't know how to answer. So that's why we not get a citizen. So I left 2010 and go Malaysia. I met with my husband and then we married at the Malaysia. So Malaysia too, because our refugee, so in the Malaysia refugee, so the government no give for any like document, children cannot go school because we are Rohingya people, that's why. So 2015, we moved in United States with 2 children. So we almost 6 years are over and I got a citizen last year, but this year my husband got a citizen. Now we are all both citizens, United States citizens.
Congratulations, Nisa. What does it mean to you to gain citizenship?
As citizenship, because I want to go visit my country. So almost 11 years, I cannot meet with my family. So I think when I have a US citizen, we want to go visit my country and then maybe for children for future. So that's why I want a citizen.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
we are nearing the top of the hour, so we're going to go lightning round. If you can take 1 minute to answer these questions, and I know that Myra and I had spoken about this before we went online, is what is one myth that you would like to share about your homeland, culture, or community that people keep getting incorrect that you want for them to know? So Myra, I'll start with you.
I wanted to make all of us understand that the people who came in, especially as the refugees resettling, they might be timid, but they're brave, very brave people. And that is why they survive everything in all the odds and they made their way here. They're very brave. And they wanted to do their best to be the productive citizens of this great country. But a lot of times they tend to be quiet. They act as though if we don't know, it might look as if they understand a lot of things and they don't ask questions. All this because they've gone through so much with the brutality by the Burmese military, but at the same time, the way they were brought up in a community, a patriarchal community where there's not so much question asked, whether in the house or in the school. So those who are working with the community or those who come in contact with the Burmese refugees, just making sure that you ask the question twice so that you know they understand what you're trying to tell them.
Thank you, Myra. I'm going to go to Ken for a second here, get his perspective from the academia perspective. Can you name one myth that people keep getting wrong?
That Karen fish paste smells bad is my personal one. The thing that frustrates me the most is the worship of Aung San Suu Kyi. I mean, she is a democratic hero. She played a really important role at a particular moment in time, but she is not the answer to the country's future because she is not pro-democracy in the way she governs, nor does she support all the ethnic groups, especially the Rohingya. So I think, as Myra said, we really need to look to the people as a whole, follow their example and support what they say they need so the country can finally shift over to a democratic and inclusive form of government.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate that. Nisa, how about you? What are some things that people get wrong that you would like for them to know?
I think we born in Myanmar, and the Myanmar or Karani or Rohingya or any people each other, like United States. A United States is every country is together work, together life, love each other, together talk. So I like the United States. I'm just watching about United States like Somali, Burmese, and the Mexico. Everybody like together. So just my country is like some people don't like Rohingya, some people don't like, so different.
Thank you, Nisa. And Ovina, would you like to share as far as one myth?
So I'll just say one thing about as for the education aspect, when we see parents and families, when we don't speak English as well as other, the native speakers, I feel like sometimes I constantly telling my students or everybody around me that just because you don't speak language doesn't mean that you're less intelligent than other people. You have other, life experience, just like Mara said, you have life experience, and also you speak your own language really well. So share your knowledge. And I tell my other friends who are in education field, like they're not dumb, they know, and just make sure that you treat them equally, you treat them like they're intelligent. And just because they don't speak English doesn't mean they don't know anything. That's just one thing I just want everybody to be aware of.
Thank you, Ovina. I couldn't agree with you more. To me, people who don't speak fluent English means that their vocabulary is twice as large or triple the amount of vocabulary that a monolingual person has. So thank you for clarifying that. I certainly appreciate it. So I know that our attendees are very engaged in the conversation. We're learning so much. So I want to keep the questions going, actually, because I have been looking forward to this dynamic group of speakers, and there are so many other things we want to address. So if we can keep going with some of our questions, and we will be answering questions again towards the end of the program. But with that, this question is for Ken. The UN Security Council has voiced its concerns about the crisis, and there has been some engagement by the international community, formally through the United Nations. Some nations have not only been expressing their concerns, but taking action in form of sanctions. And I know Myra had touched on this, but can you please discuss the international community and the role of sanctions in support of Burma?
Sure. It's a difficult question in that sanctions were used in decades past to try to pressure the military governments to change or to step down and permit civilian rule. And broadly speaking, they did not work. And the military regime found other ways to generate money. And so the stated goal was not achieved. Now, the challenge here is to find ways to cut off money supply to the military regime, because a lot of the support within the military comes from the money it redistributes to other members of the military to buy loyalty, but do so in a way that doesn't harm ordinary people. Sanctions that affect the garment industry, the apparel industry, which is one of the biggest employers of people outside agriculture, and especially women, can be devastating to households if you apply it without making it what's called a smart sanction, a strategic sanction. So what I would invite people to do, and Myra probably has a better answer here, is find out from the Burmese themselves what they want sanctioned, what kind of economic hardship are they willing to endure as part of the effort to restore democracy, rather than applying them without consulting the Burmese first. Do it in an informed way is my short answer.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that response. And I would love to hear if Myra would like to add to that as well. If you feel that there are, the international community and their role of sanctions, what's the best way to support?
As I put out earlier, so the ones that I put out, it's targeted. We call it targeted because we're trying to target the military specifically instead of having any sanctions. And that is why when we do advocacy here at the Hill, we're trying to make sure we pick the ones that will benefit the people on the ground as best possible, but also hurt people on the ground at least the least possible. And so that is what we're doing. But going back to the UN, I'm just sick and tired of their condemnation. That's it. Your condemnation doesn't work, and stop using condemnation, but put the words into actions and implement the actions that you wanted to see.
Thank you, Myra. I appreciate that. We've had a couple questions in the chat with regard to whether this session will be recorded, and it is being recorded. So you can view it later if you have to bow out early or would like to watch it again, because there's so much, it's just so packed with information today. Thank you, Myra, for that. This question is also for you. We're seeing that there is a social justice movement across the United States that not only included civil disobedience that you had spoken of, but also boycotts of certain businesses. In fact, you're directly involved with some of these actions and movements. Can you talk more about your work with U.S. Campaign for Burma? How is it developed and how is it working right now?
Thank you. We're just a small team, and of course, we cannot do all on our own, but the very good thing is that we have the capacity to work with the diaspora across the US. We have people from different ethnic communities come out and do the work together, depending on what we have, and we share with them. They also picking up what they can do. So for instance, we're trying to encourage and urge our senators to co-sponsor the bills or the resolutions. And when we get to them, sort of we create talking points for them, say, and then we send it over to them. They also do their job. And that is the beauty of doing advocacy, because we cannot do it alone. And their voices amplify the voices of the people on the ground, which is very powerful. And I wanted to continue encouraging that. Not just that, we're also working with colleagues on the ground, those who work directly with the impacted community, whether in ethnic minorities area as well as in the urban area. And also our colleague NGOs here, whether in the US as well as in other countries. So we just have to collectively work together in order to bring down this brutal Burmese military junta.
Thank you so much, Myra, and thank you for the work that you're doing. This question is for Elvina. How are Burmese communities in Colorado responding to current events in Burma? And how How are your non-Burmese neighbors in Colorado supporting these movements?
Thank you for asking a great question. It's in the Colorado Burmese community, we came together to show the opposition of the coup since the day after the coup. So it's February 2nd, by rallying and protesting in front of the state capitol every Sunday to just raise awareness here in the state, raise funding to provide resources for the displaced people in Burma, regardless of the ethnic groups affected, because everybody is affected by it. And the movement, so I encourage all of our friends to support us by just rallying with us, because the more people we have, the louder noise we can make. So just come join us at the state capitol, spread the words of the current situation in Burma, and if possible, find organization that you trust to donate, because it is crucial time for our people they need support for the funding for shelter, food, and necessary medical supplies currently. So that's what we're doing in Colorado.
Thank you, Ovina. And I understand there's an event coming up as well on the 20th. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So in Colorado, we have, just like Ken mentioned it in his speech earlier, that, you know, everybody come together with different background, but our goal is to literally just stop this coup. How can we stop this coup when we're here? The only way we can stop this coup is just to spread the words, to stop. We're protesting in front of Chevron, like stop it, stop helping the military, you know, and raising money. So on the 20th, that's what we're going to do, just to go there and spread the awareness and rallying, just having a fundraiser for our people who's currently needed desperate, you know, medical supplies and shelter and food.
Thank you, Ovina. So once again, for the folks who have asked about whether or not this session is being recorded, it is being recorded, and we will send a link out of the recording to all attendees and all of those who have registered, in case you don't want to miss the end and still want to see the remaining of our program. So the final question before we get to the attendee questions is, this question is going to go to Nisa. What are 2 things that the community can do to help?
Thank you for question, but I don't know really about community in Greenlee. So this meeting is first time for me. I'm just nervous. I don't know how to with talking. So in Greenlee, I don't really know about our community.
That's completely okay, and we're so happy that you're here to share your experiences with us. And if you think of something, please let me know. We'd love to hear what your suggestions are. I'd like to move to Myra on what's one thing that the community can do to assist.
I just wanted to say that use your voice to amplify the voices of those who are suffering, because we have all the rights, we have the space, we have the freedom. We don't have to be worried about speaking out today and being killed tomorrow night. We have it all here. And I just hope that you're making time, trying to educate yourself, read a lot, making sure that you know what's going on so that you know what to talk about. And if you need any further information as to what to say to whoever you wanted to meet, please let me know. I'm always here, and I'm more than happy to work with you, because I know you want to do something great.
Thank you, Myra. Ken, what's one thing that the community can do to help?
I would echo what Myra just said. Educate yourself, find out what Burmese groups, whether it's the Karen or the Rohingya or the National Unity Government or the group of your choice, wants, and then do what you can with like-minded people to support them. And there is a huge need. You can focus on people in the refugee camps, in Bangladesh. You can work on internally displaced persons, women and children, education, health. Sadly, it is a very long list of need. So find out, work on what you care about, educate yourself, and then find out what that community wants you to do to help.
Thank you so much, Ken. And Elvina, do you have one suggestion that you would like to tell the community in order to help your community?
Again, I will definitely say, like, I will say one thing is for schools, just to inform your teachers, your educators, who you're working with about, you know, who are the Burmese people and how are they suffering right now, and how can you provide help, like mental help and all that. So it will be very, very useful, especially right now, because of the trigger of the lifelong trauma.
Thank you so much, Elvina. Now we'll get to the attendee questions, and thank you for your patience. This was such an engaging conversation. I just wanted to make sure that we touch on these issues that we have had questions on and other folks have had questions on. So this question is from Myra. Does the total number of people in minority groups collectively outnumber the ethnic Burman people?
Yes, we are actually.
Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yes, we are, but if we play by the rule, I don't think we are. Why? Is because the Burmese military junta has been using the Burmanization for as long as I can remember. So they use so many ways to turn everyone into Burman, so that we are losing Karen, Kachin, Chin, and every other ethnic groups. And so they use rape as weapon of war in order to turn every babies into Burman. They go out to ethnic minority states, killing children's parents, and then brought them back when they were very young, and turn them into military or military leaders or whoever they wanted to turn them into. Burning down people's villages. That is another way of trying to kill the ethnic, wiping out ethnic groups so that you don't have any other ethnic group. And on top of that, going to 135 sub-ethnic groups, I cannot accept that. Why? Is because they're trying to split us into smaller groups so that we are not as powerful as we are, as big as we are. And with all these factors, it's many more. I can make a whole list and it's not going to end anytime soon. So, I mean, we're talking about all this stuff. That is why you will see Burman as the majority, but in reality, they may not be as big as they think. But because of the way they treat us, the way they're trying to wipe us out, and that is why you see a lot more Burman. And make no mistake, the language, the intermarriages, and all this stuff. So I still have in my list.
Thank you, Myra. I appreciate that. We have a comment by Natalie who says that thank you for all for being willing to be so vulnerable and to share such intimate experiences and feelings with us. This has been such an amazing session, so informative and so powerful. Thank you for that, Natalie. We also have a comment and a question from Sarah Beth Ford. This has been very in-depth and helpful. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. I know this will be recorded, will be shareable, yes. I asked this because I have some people I might send it to better understand the situation in Burma. So thank you for that, Sarah. We have a question. We'll guess the guest to the seminar. Yep, we will share the recording. And Philip has a question as well. Well, while the military seeks to dominate ethnic minorities, how are these minority groups building unity to create common cause to strengthen their response? Are the ethnic groups cooperating, or are they mainly self-interested? I'll pose this to Ken first, and then if Myra, if you would like to add to that as well.
It's a very...
I'm happy to repeat the question too.
No. I'm sighing because it's a very difficult question to answer. I'd say on the one hand, and it's been natural because of the divide and rule policies that people have sought to help their co-ethnics, as it's often described. So Karen, for reasons of geography, language, religion, and so on, have created civil society organizations to help other Karen, the Karenni with the Karenni, the Shan, Gachin, and Chin, and so on. And that is both understandable, but it has created, as I mentioned earlier, difficulties in finding ways to cooperate. I'm not saying they don't exist. They have existed at the political level at certain moments of time. There's growing conversation of creating a federal army rather than having a Burman-dominated one. It's almost entirely Burman. But there's still a long way away, in my opinion, of finding meaningful ways in which to collaborate with one another to change the political and economic and cultural dynamics. Perhaps my panelists disagree, but in my view, a lot of work needs to be done to create trust across those differences, because the similarities outweigh them. And when they have a greater common cause, a lot of things can change for the better.
Thank you, Ken. Myra, would you like to add to that as well?
So they are working together. The one thing we all learn, and our audience need to know, is that we're fighting one common enemy. The perpetrators, the killers, is the same person that killed every other ethnic groups. And that is what we learn. And that is why we come together. We share information, resources, whether education or health and all these. We also coming together at different times when they created the Unify command group, where they share information, whether in the political arena, in the political views, or in the armed service, armed groups. So they call it, okay, so right now they call it EAO, the ethnic armed organizations. That's why they're coming together to work together and to go through the peace talk process with the Burmese military. But apparently it didn't work out, and everything is falling apart right now. But yes, we do work together. There are times when we have to work individually, we do it individually as well. But there will be always coordinations between the groups as well.
Thank you, Myra. Before we get into our next question, there were a couple of folks who had asked if there's a website that gives information on the Colorado protest and rally. I think that's directed to Elvina. If you can drop it into the chat for folks who want to support locally in Colorado, and also some organizations that you would like for folks to know that you feel are credible and that we should be supporting right now. If you can drop that in the chat for our attendees, and please support these organizations, and please voice your concerns so we can keep this movement and support continuing. So there is a question from Corey Williams. Are there any current bills in the US Senate or House that we should be advocating for? If so, what are the bill numbers and how do we find talking points? This is probably directed for Myra.
My good friend Corey, you're here. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Well, we are working on one right now, which we're hoping it is introduced sometimes within this month, hopefully before the end of the month, because it is very much needed. We're looking for introduced, because we wanted it to be a bipartisan bill. So we're still working on it. I will certainly come to you when time comes.
Thank you, Myra. We have a comment from Jennifer Gadich, our friend, who says that, know that you're new country citizens and we are with you and we stand with you. So please keep sharing your stories. That's wonderful. We also have a comment, and says here, thanks for all of you. I very much appreciated learning the historical background, learning about the diverse diversity and nuances and identities that make up the nation of Burma, and the steps in advocacy and education that they can take. And lastly, the heart and passion of each person who shared. They very much appreciate debunking the myths. I think everyone who is not from the US has so many myths about our own countries and identities. So I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to address that. There is another question that is about COVID and how the COVID crisis in India has spilled over to Burma. Ken, would you like to address this question?
Yes. Burma, like other parts of Southeast Asia, has gotten off relatively lightly in terms of the COVID epidemic, certainly as compared to places like the United States, Italy, Brazil, and so on. They've had a couple waves. It's again becoming a very serious issue because the health sector is so badly underfunded and has been underfunded for decades that their capacity to deal with people if they need hospitalization is very limited. So they are struggling. I do not know anything about their vaccination schedule. My assumption is, given the situation with the coup, no mass vaccination is going on. I've not heard of anything. The other big fear is the spread of COVID in the refugee camps in Bangladesh for the Rohingya. There have been cases, but it's not run out of control that I'm aware of. And fingers are crossed because they have nowhere else to go. It's more than 1 million people crammed into a very tiny space. It would be perfect for a pandemic, but fortunately it's not gotten out of control there yet either.
Thank you so much, Ken. Appreciate that. And final thoughts and comments from our panelists. You can provide your final thoughts in a minute or less, and then we can wrap up the session. That would be wonderful. Nisa, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of your last thoughts and comments, we certainly appreciate it.
My last comment is I just pray for my country, so everything like before normally. Hopefully I want to meet with my family, so my children and their grandma with me together. So this is, I just pray for my country, all hopefully normal.
Thank you so much, Nisa. And again, I love that part in your bio where you were talking about having your children meet their grandmother. I can't wait for the day that that happens. So you'll have to keep us posted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Ovina, last thoughts or comments?
Thank you so much for hosting these. I really appreciate it because it is it's very important issues, and the only way we can change can happen is when we all raise awareness of the situation and the impact of the situation and what's the actual experience is like and why it can happen again. It can happen again. So hopefully I just pray that we educate ourselves more and use our voice, just like Myra said, so that the history can't keep repeat itself. This is just terrible. So I just want to thank everybody for coming and listening and educating yourself.
Thank you, Ovina. And by the way, when you said earlier about how, you know, people, when they asked you where you were born and you said, I don't belong anywhere, I'm not anybody, well, you are somebody. By you raising your voice and making sure that people don't forget about what's happening in your homeland and where you are from, I think you are making a difference. So I don't want you to underplay the significance and the impact that you're making. So thank you for that. Myra, any last thoughts or comments?
Certainly. So you already know what I'm going to say. We need tangible actions. And that is why I wanted to emphasize to you all, you have the power, your petitions, your letters, your phone calls, emails, information sharing, posting on your respective Facebook and Twitters and Instagrams. All these have the power and all these can help us make a difference. So all in all, I wanted to say that now more than ever, the Burma needs you, the people of Burma needs you, and I need you to join me in the fight against the Burmese military regime. So let's just say never again to the Burmese military junta, and once and for all, let's try and make it happen. With that, I wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Myra. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. Keep up the amazing work and keep pushing for better change, right? More authentic change. Thank you. Ken, last thoughts and words that you would like to share with all of us.
Sure. Myra took the words out of my mouth, and I was going to say, you know, the old expression, knowledge is power, which is fine. It's the first step, but knowledge without action is not much of anything. So it is my hope today that what you've learned will inspire you to learn more. And as part of that, take concrete steps to do what you can to exercise the freedoms you have on behalf of other people who cannot, whether it be people in Burma or any other hotspot, crisis spot around the world. Do what you can. It is up to us. So thank you.
Ken, thank you so much. And you know, a couple of things from your presentation that really stood out for me was the self-determination aspect about how ethnic minorities are wanting to rise up and have their voices heard, but also the fact that most importantly, when you talked about whose suffering is it anyway, and why are certain sufferings not focused upon. And I really do appreciate your perspective and all the work that you've done to help us as a community at large better understand it in a more diverse perspective and how it impacts Burma then and Burma now. So thank you so much. With that, if you would like to stay connected with Colorado Refugee Connect and the Colorado Refugee Speakers Bureau, which I am part of, please follow us on Facebook for all updates and event updates and news updates. But we would also invite you to join us next Friday at 12 p.m., which is noon, for a Rebuilding the Refugee Program webinar. And in the spirit of celebration, please join us on World Refugee Day on June 20th. It's on a weekend, so hopefully you will be available, and it will be at Aurora City Park between 1 and 4. You will be enjoying live music, dance performances, food, and more. And the information is on the Colorado Refugee Connect website. And there's no need to RSVP. To show up and bring folks, and let's celebrate our refugee and immigrant communities. I want to thank you all for attending. I most certainly would like to thank our panelists. I have been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while now. And I just enjoy not only your perspective, but your courage and your willingness to share so that we can help more effectively and more authentically. With that, I hope all of you have a great remainder of your day and a happy weekend. And again, thank you for joining us, and please continue to support Burma and those who are impacted. And thank you again for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.